Hello, Internet. It's Daniel here with Driving and Dragons. Going to do a little D&D Reacts today. We are taking a look at the Fantasy Forge. And there, your players aren't overpowered. You just need this. Now, I'm a big fan of Fantasy Forge. I like them a lot. They are very much a 5e narrative-centric channel, however. And as we know, I'm not a big 5e guy, though I am a narrative GM. And it's kind of funny because a lot of times when narrative channels like this bring out, hey, what's this problem? It's generally because they need some of that more mechanical adventuring style. It's a lot of times it's because they've neglected the other parts of the game, and the advice is literally just, hey, there's a reason these mechanics that you like to ignore and hand wave away influence your game, because there's a reason they exist. And it comes back to kind of a philosophy of being a good game master, where you should really kind of understand something before you change it. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, all right, you need to play raw until you just really know the rules and you just really dug in and it's all raw until anything happens. I mean, explicitly the way it's written in the book at all times, forever and ever, until you're really an expert before you start messing with stuff. That's not the case, especially in these TTRPGs. I mean, in that case, a lot of times you're just going to run off groups. And what you really need to do, though, is you need to make small adjustments as you're playing, as you're implementing rules. If you see that a mechanic or a rule doesn't quite work the way it's supposed to, you introduce small adjustments and small changes, and you move them in increments. The big thing is that a lot of people look at something and then just throw the baby out with the bathwater, and then they wonder why it is that their kid's missing. So we're going to see if there's any of that in here. But let's go ahead and take a look-see and see what he has to say. While you're here, like, share, subscribe, comment below. Let me know what you think and what you think about what he says, what you think about my commentary, and head on over to my Patreon and throw some money in the kitty to fix up a car that you could win. Talk to you soon. Let's get this started.
Do you ever feel like your players steamroll every single one of your encounters? Like, no matter what you throw at them, they seem to just wipe the floor with it and take 0 damage, and then they go flirt with the blacksmith for 45 minutes. Yeah, that's not because they're too strong. It's probably because you're forgetting something very important. And I want to be clear, this video isn't about nerfing your players. It's not about punishing them. It's about why your game might feel unbalanced and what D&D specifically was actually designed to do that you may not realize. And also, side note, this is specifically for D&D 5e. I need to learn to be more specific when I write, so this is me being specific. You may applaud.
There's actually a lot of truth to that. You do have this problem happen a lot in the commentary space. Yes, there's a lot of things that are kind of general to, as we would call them, system agnostic or whatever, that generally apply to role playing as a whole. Some best practices, a lot of the table management type things, basic role playing design, that sort of thing. However, a lot of cases, you really do need to be kind of specific about what system you're talking about, especially if any kind of mechanics are going to be involved. Because even if you take Dungeons and Dragons, all right, so you got some games like Call of Cthulhu, where from 1st edition through 7th edition, the changes in the way the game works and the style of game, there really isn't any, okay? Yes, there are some mechanical differences where some things were adjusted or changed to maybe better accomplish a goal, but Call of Cthulhu 1st edition all the way through 7th edition maintains the same overall tenor and tone. It is a very deadly investigation, high tension, investigative game, and that's never changed. Then you have games like Dungeons and Dragons. 1st edition, 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 4th edition, 5th edition. None of them are even really the same game. They share some similarities, but none of them are really even the same actual game. 1st edition is very much a almost wargamey dungeon crawl. It's coming out of the wargaming community, coming out of the wargaming hobby, basically trying to say, how can I be a war game where we only control an individual soldier and everybody is made up as part of a squad? So it's like the entire party is one piece on the wargaming board, but it's very much an adventure conflict system. Then you get into second edition, where second edition really starts to dump in a lot of the narrative aspects. That's really post Hickman Revolution, where it still has very similar mechanics to first edition, but it is also a different game. And there were different focuses in a lot of the development. Third edition turns into more of a heroic fantasy style game. And it's very much more gamist than first and second edition. Fourth edition is straight up trying to emulate things like World of Warcraft. It's tabletop role-playing game. It's almost exclusively designed for miniatures. Theater of the Mind is not super effective with fourth edition. It has mechanics that are similar to some video games, where after you reach a certain level, enemies basically become negligible. That with your like your minions that all have one hit point and that sort of thing. It is very much like tabletop MMO. And then fifth edition's originally designed as a dungeon crawler. It's originally designed as more of an adventure game, more similar to first edition, but then got just dumped on with a bunch of narrative additions, which I think is the biggest issue with later fifth edition, is that most of the supplemental material is not of the same philosophy of fifth edition. And this is where you get things like, man, fifth edition was actually a really solid game until Tasha's, or until such and such came out. And it's because they changed it. The philosophy changed. It was no longer an adventure game that had a stately progression of abilities and a stately increase of abilities and powers. It turned into like shonen anime power creep, where the next book that comes out more or less renders everything from the books that came before it useless, because it's like, okay, well, now the thing that used to be your big bad power is something that you just inherently use all the time, and you've got a new big bad power. And if the people are using the old books, they're inherently not as strong. And it's because that adventurer aspect was just weeded out. But anyway, let's see what else he has to say here. Point is, very important especially when you talk about anything that has to do with mechanics or balancing encounters, you need to know what system you're playing with.
Now, with the rise of Critical Role and Dimension 20, amazing shows, by the way, I'm a huge fan, and with lots of other channels and shows popping up just like them, trying to find a spot, right, a place for themselves online and find an audience to do what they love to do, right? Same thing I'm doing. I'm not complaining here. A lot of people are building their campaigns around big emotional moments and heavy narrative arcs, which is awesome. If you know my channel, you know that I love that stuff. I'm a writer, I'm a filmmaker. That is my bread and butter. But you also need to remember that those are shows. They're designed to entertain, built with completely different pacing in mind than the average home game. So let's talk about it. Well, first of all,
that is a very good point. I'm glad he brought it up, because a lot of critters do not recognize this. Critical Role Dimension 20. They are not playing D&D. They are playing the role of people playing D&D. Okay? It's very loosely scripted, but more importantly than anything else, the goal of you sitting down at your table is to play a game and have fun with your friends. The goal of them sitting down at the table is to present an idealized version of playing that game and to produce an entertainment product for people to watch. And that does not, and this is where you have your problems with Daggerheart and Candela Obscura and stuff like that. It lacks the things that are necessary to handle a situation where you're actually trying to resolve conflict and where people have different varying opinions and whatnot. Everybody wasn't given their point sheet and their goal ahead of time. And a lot of times there's not that inherent agreement that we're all going to go this direction, we're all going to go to that direction. It's a completely different animal than what is done on these, on any of these Let's Plays. It's also why you see so many of them fail, because when you have a live play like Critical Role, the goal is sit down, make entertainment product, and give it the trappings of us playing D&D. They are no more playing. It's like trying to learn how to take care of somebody's medical needs by watching Scrubs. or General Hospital if you don't want it to be a comedy. You know, if you sit down and watch General Hospital every morning with the old ladies up at the old folks' home watching their soaps, you are not going to be an effective doctor versus, you know, practicing actual medicine. But practicing actual medicine would be boring on TV. That's why when you get somebody who does an actual live play where they just sit down and play the game, those shows tend to fail a lot more and they tend to have a lot less retention and a lot less viewership because tabletop role-playing games are not a spectator sport.
What's important to note is that D&D is designed for multiple encounters a day. Like not one, not two. The game is actually built around the assumption that your party is going to face around 6 to 8 encounters between long rests. Yes, really, that many. And that's because the game was designed around dungeon crawls, like spending multiple sessions, if not dozens, going from one room to another. So it made sense. But we've seen this push towards more narrative-based games, which throws off the balance. And so you, as DMs of those games, have to learn to pivot. The second thing to really note here is that narrative-heavy campaigns often skip the grind. Narrative-first campaigns where roleplay is king and every arc feels like a Netflix original, they're incredible. Again, huge fan, especially love Dimension 20. They're what a lot of us are striving for. And
that in therein lies the problem. That's what a lot of us are striving for. I'm not, but you know, there's a lot of people out there who are striving for that. The problem is true narrative stakes, narrative attachment, you know, that one NPC that everybody loves that's going to die or whatever, or that, you know, this is why that always works better with a player character dying than it does with an NPC, is because we're going to naturally have attachment to the people we're playing with and to their characters. But these things have to be natural and organic. On these shows, if it's not explicitly agreed to off camera in their storyboard meetings, it is at least inexplicitly agreed to, kind of unspoken agreement, because, we're all sitting here trying to make this entertainment product. We're all going to focus on attaching. This is clearly the NPC that we're supposed to develop some kind of relationship with. I'm going to focus on developing a relationship there so that we can create the narrative moment later on, because we are creating something for others. You can't create that thing for yourself. That's why it fails. So the grind actually matters. It doesn't matter when you're just watching it. All you need to do is see the effects. You need the grind to, say, develop those bonds between you and that town, those NPCs. You need to be able to think back and remember about the 9 times that the 9-10 battles, the 8 sessions that you had to go through to save that town. You need that to organically develop those connections. When you're watching it as a spectator, you just need to see that a result happened. You just need a nod and then a result for you to connect the dots. That's why it works on Dimension 20 or on Critical Role. That's why it doesn't work at your table. You need those elements.
They're what actual plays have trained us to prioritize. Emotional payoffs, plot twists, big character moments. But when you run games like this, you're also stripping out something the rule set was built around, and that's the grind. In traditional dungeon crawls, players are pushed through gauntlets of combat and obstacles. They slowly lose spell slots, HP, items, energy, and all of that wear and tear is the pressure that makes every single decision that they make matter. But when you're playing a narrative-heavy game, players have these deep conversations, and then they'll have one fight, and then a long rest, and then another big roleplay scene, and then another boss fight. And every combat is a cinematic set piece. And while that feels great on paper, it removes the very friction that keeps the tension alive in the game. Because when there's no attrition, then there's no restraint. Players can cast their biggest spells in every single fight. Marshals don't get to shine as much because casters always have these full gas tanks. And then suddenly every encounter feels easy. And then you think you're doing something wrong. And it's not because your players are too powerful, but it's because the game isn't bleeding them dry like it was designed to. Now, let's talk about something else that we also forget, and that's that resource management is sort of the game's the hidden lever, if you will, right? That resource attrition is the real balancing mechanic of 5e. I would argue that combat as well, like actually creating encounters is another part of that, but that's a whole other conversation. It's not hit points, it's not monster stats, it's what the party still has left to spend, and that's their spell slots, their rages, their bardic inspiration, their superiority dice, all of those things that exist in a system where players are supposed to feel the pinch over time. That's the lever. That's the thing that keeps the game tense, and if you're running one encounter per long rest, then that lever is not even going unused. It's just irrelevant.
Now, the thing about it is that is actually a DM failing. Now, your players are going to push back against it because they've kind of been taught this by modern video games, and they've definitely been taught this by the kind of culture that has risen specifically around Dungeons and Dragons. Is that, we have our big boss fight, that's the end of the episode, we sit down, we recover. And those are the tension moments. Those are the things where we use all of our stuff and then we're done, and then we go back to the easy stuff. The problem is the lack of pressure. You need that pressure. And here's the thing, guys, it doesn't have to be all combat. You can find non-combat ways to, say, push your spellcasters into using their spells. You can put obstacles in place that make them use their combat abilities in other ways, and other things that can help them deplete resources. But one of the biggest things here is there's got to be some kind of backward pressure against the players that forces them to keep moving forward. At the risk of giving the Bro SR a ton of credit here, this is where timekeeping comes in. All right. I'm not going to talk about one-to-one timing, because I think one-to-one timing, while it serves its purpose and has its effectiveness, is probably not the right way to keep time for most tables. And also, let's remember that like one-to-one timekeeping is predominantly a downtime mechanic. It is something to handle downtime more than anything else. Stop time in this case works just fine because we're not worried about downtime. We're worried about in-session pressure. Where the timekeeping aspect comes into it is, for instance, if you are doing something that has to do with like some greater conflict, all right? And let's just say it's the traditional Goblin adventure. Well, you need to finish this Goblin Raider adventure. You need to do this before the big orc army gets here. And you can foreshadow that this big orc army is on the way. And if you can't get these goblins dislodged, it's going to give them their foothold to launch invasions into the deeper part of the kingdom or the barony or whatever. Or you need to make sure this happens before the big caravan comes in, because if they hit that big caravan, even if you kill the goblins after that, the village won't survive the winter. They need those items from that caravan. By saying, hey, you've got at most 5 or 6 days to accomplish this, and it's 3 days away, they can't take the long rest after they have the random encounter on the street or on the road, because they can't afford to lose the day. They have to soldier on, and they have to keep going. It's not locking you. You don't have to do a time bomb every single time, but you have to have some sort of pressure that prevents them from thinking, I have all the time in the world to accomplish these things. And that also leads to put them in a situation where retreating takes time too. It's not as simple as, oh, we're just going to go outside and sleep. You go outside and sleep, the monsters are going to follow you outside. You're going to have to go all the way back to the village. And it's going to take you days to get all the way back to the village, during which time the dungeon is going to repopulate. The monsters are going to come back, and you're basically going to be going back and fighting the same fight over and over again. It's not a pressure that you have to do this now, but it is a thing that's going to make them, if they want to progress or accomplish their goal, they're going to have to do more than just go in and fight the fight and then recover.
Giving them too much, because 5e was designed so that players start strong and then slowly burn out. I mean, if you think about it, most spellcasters are loaded with options that are powerful if used carefully. But if they can cast Fireball every fight with no consequences, then of course things are going to start to feel unbalanced. You're watching a system that assumes depletion but never gets depleted. And it's not just the casters either. Fighters with Action Surge, Paladins with Lay on Hands, Barbarians with Rage, they're all tuned to survive multiple fights. When they only face one, then that challenge is artificial. And then the last thing I want to cover is how encounter variety matters more than difficulty. So let's say you realize that your players are steamrolling everything and your gut instinct is probably to crank the dial. So you double the HP, you add more actions, you throw in a dragon with maximum damage breath, and that'll shake them up, like once, maybe twice. But the problem is that increasing the difficulty isn't the same as increasing tension. What you're actually doing is just stretching out that fight and making it more and more boring, in my opinion. What really matters is encounter variety, because when every fight is roll initiative, kill the bad guys, then the only way to make it harder is to inflate the numbers. And that doesn't create excitement. It just creates that excessive bloat. And the real tension comes from situational pressure. So these are things like objectives, time limits, moral dilemmas, terrain that changes, enemies that don't fight to the death, so they turn around and run away, and now you have a chase sequence halfway through the fight. Or situations where killing isn't even the winning condition, because maybe it's like a hostage situation, and the Thieves Guild doesn't want any bodies or anything like that, so you're not even allowed to kill. Or maybe you remove the ability to kill because you have to take their weapons away because they're going into a high security area where they had to relinquish all of their stuff. Right. So now they can't kill. And so it really becomes about changing their mentality and how they're going to solve specific situations, and what winning conditions look like in their brain starts to change. So
that's absolutely 100% correct. I'll add one more to that. There's also using monsters or creatures as the environment. Hopefully, be careful here in case one of my players is watching, because they're kind of in the middle of this situation. I have a situation in one of my games right now where my players are in this keep, right? They're in this big keep, and it's a kind of dilapidated keep. One of the towers is falling off the corner. There's damage to the upper floors on the west side from a previous siege, and the whole thing's filled with undead. Now, they chased a monster there that kidnapped kidnapped the body of one of their party members. Deck of many things situation. Soul got trapped away from the body, and then the enemy came and retrieved the body. So they're chasing them, trying to get the body back. They know they need to go in. They need to go through this keep. They're fighting all these undead. Well, they're like level 9, and there's a challenge rating 15 Nightwing up at the top. They've got no chance in a straight fight with this thing. But because of the nature of the way the keep is, it can't really get inside to fight them. And as long as they are inside and it is outside, it has limited options. It has to bust through the ceiling if they're on the top floor. It has to use magic to attack through the windows or through the holes in the ceiling or that sort of thing. And it has to challenge them otherwise from outside. And they can, try and chip away at it, or it just becomes an environmental factor where they're in the inside of the keep. They're fighting monsters. They need to run away. They flee, and shit, we fled into the outside, and now the thing can see us through the windows, and we think we got out into the hallway away from those ghouls that were in that room, and next thing you know, Cone of Cold comes in through the window, and we're reminded that this thing is an ever-present monster that's floating around out there. It's constantly trying to get in and get at us, so it's always there. And that is an ongoing monster encounter that operates different than crank up difficulty and, use fireball, et cetera, et cetera. There's basically, it adds another element to every encounter in there. And also it allowed me to use a lot of much weaker monsters inside the keep, where in a straight fight, they're really not that much of a challenge. But because there's this other element, it restricts a lot of the abilities, and it restricts a lot of the options the players have. For instance, they go into a small room and they have to fight these things. They can't throw a fireball because they'll hit themselves. But if they try to retreat back out in the hallway and throw the fireball in there, the Nightwing might be out there to get them. So they've got a much more powerful thing behind them. So they have to fight without those area of effect things. The caster has to risk being in melee and that sort of thing, which causes more resource depletion, and it causes more tactics and more thought and more tension on the players. Plus, it also restricts their ability to rest. If they go outside, they're going to be in trouble. If they rest inside, they're going to be in trouble. So they can't just say, oh, well, we finished that fight. We're going to post up in the barracks and go to sleep and get all of our stuff back. And they're getting to the point where they're running out of stuff, and they're really feeling that pinch. That is a narrative. That is a pressure. It is a narrative pressure, and it is a mechanical pressure that doesn't feel like just, oh, he's just trying to cheat us out of our ability to rest and get stuff back.
One fight might be protecting a wagon that's under siege, and then the next fight is chasing an assassin across rooftops while you're fending off ambushes from his people or whatever. Or you're trying to stop a ritual before the timer hits 0. So these things aren't harder, they're just more tense, and they engage different parts of the party, and they stop your players from falling into autopilot. Now, with all of that said, how do you fix this? How do you fix your players from being overpowered or from not having these things, right? Well, it just requires a mindset shift. You don't need to force your players through 8 exhausting fights in a row just to play 5e correctly, You just need to reintroduce that pressure. You need to create friction between them and their power. So I would say start by sprinkling in smaller, low stakes encounters. Not everything needs to be a boss fight, even a pack of wolves and then a collapsing bridge and then a cursed zone. All of that is going to eat away at HP over time and burn through their player resources. Again, the point here is to force choices. So maybe the wizard can cast Fireball, but should they? Because they don't know when they're going to get to rest again. And what if there's something worse waiting after that, right? Then they're going to wish they had that Fireball. And that's what you want them thinking. You can also limit rest opportunities, like narratively. Maybe the dungeon's collapsing. Maybe long rest requires safety, right? You can't rest right now. There's too many enemies nearby. Or, in my case, on my table, you need a full 8 hours without interruption. Otherwise, it starts to take a toll. And that's, if the party's being hunted, well, now they don't get a full 8 hours. And that doesn't punish them. It just, again, reframes that tension. It just changes the stakes for them, changes the situation. Now, what's even better is when you can mix in mechanical pressure with that story pressure. So maybe the party has to stop a ritual before dawn, and then suddenly long rest isn't an option because things are moving faster. And now your players are having to play smart instead of playing strong, right? Because now you're squeezing those mechanical fixes. So I guess really ultimately that's the fix. You don't nerf the party, you nerf the predictability of their safety. And in doing that, you make every decision matter again, because now they're going to constantly be thinking, well, what if I need this later? Or what other ways can I do this? What other ways can I solve X, Y, and Z without using this potion or without using this spell slot that I need? And ultimately, it's okay to love narrative. By doing this or by saying any of this, I'm not saying that you can't love narrative games. I'm just saying remember the system you're using. And if you come out of a session and you feel like they did too well or you're not challenging them enough, then maybe it's because you need to tweak some of the ways that you're setting up your sessions. If you love cinematic, emotional, roleplay heavy campaigns, then good, because I do too. That means, we're two of a kind. If your table thrives on those character arcs and those secrets and those tearful moments, that's incredible. But Dungeons and Dragons is a game, and games have rules. So I'm not trying to restrict you, but creating that tension and the challenge and ultimate satisfaction, it all comes down to sort of a mix between the role playing and the mechanics. The issue isn't that you're telling a story, it's that you might be building that story on a system that you're not fully using, is really what I'm trying to get down to. So if you want your sessions to feel tense again, if you want your villains to land and your victories to matter, and you just feel like you just don't have a grasp, then maybe, try looking at the framework that you're using for your sessions, and just try to build something that's smarter, design more friction, let your players sweat a little bit. That's about it. That's all for me. So there you go. There's your video for this week. For John.
Okay, not a bad video at all. A lot of good stuff there, and really, kind of touching on some important stuff. We need to remember what our systems are designed for. That is the honest truth of the matter, and we forget that a lot. We often forget that our systems are designed for a specific type of play, or that our systems are designed to foster a certain it has certain priors that it assumes. For instance, it assumes multiple encounters. I'm going to put this to you, and this kind of plays back into what it is. And this is a major problem with people who get too narrative and too role play focused. If you cannot get your role play focus and put your role play situations to where you can absorb those resources, cause them to use spells, even hell, don't even cause them to use spells. But if your wizard is always preparing, say, a third of their spell slots for stuff that are used out of combat, and you've just taken away a third of those spell slots. If you can heavily limit those kind of things, you can make your combat encounters better and more challenging. And it's also better both from a narrative perspective, from a character building perspective, and it is better from an excitement and speed perspective. If instead of throwing big, giant, epic encounters all the time, you throw large amounts of small encounters. You got combat encounters that take 3 or 4 rounds. You have combat encounters where you don't even cycle through the entire party. There's 5 people in the party. The first 3 characters do something, and that ends the encounter. But it absorbs more of those resources. It takes a little bit more away. It gives you those quick little action doses. Then when the big thing happens and they don't have all their resources, it makes that a more challenging encounter. So it's important to think about that. What is the purpose of this mechanic or this design? The purpose is, it tells you right there in the book, it's designed for you to have this many encounters a day with this kind of resource usage. So if you're not going to put that many encounters in, you need to find other ways to restrict or limit those resources. And you need to use some sort of backward pressure, ticking time bomb, time clock. Thing becomes irrelevant if you wait too long, whatever the case may be, something that encourages the players to not take too much time between encounters. Because you get to that point, you may as well just go pick something that's 5 or 6 levels higher than them, throw it in there and say, okay, my goal is now to make sure that I kill at least one player character every fight. Because if I can't wipe out at least 1 or 2 players every fight, I can't challenge the party, because death does not go away with a single long rest. That's what I got for you guys today. Let me know what you think about this reaction. I'll see you guys next time.